Hello, my name is James Pikeway. Welcome to Podaholics, and this is DocTalk with Dr. Jenna Burton. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of cool stuff today. And we promise, we are not going to be concentrating on COVID-19. I'm sure it'll fit into something that we're doing. But ultimately, there's a lot of other things going on in the world, and we need some distraction.
Do you not remember in Harry Potter, and you weren't allowed to say a particular name? It was like the name that couldn't be spoken. I feel like that's how we should start to treat coronavirus. It's the word that cannot be said. Let's think about other aspects of life before we all go insane. James.
Oh man, I'm telling you, it is a little bit of insanity. And one of the things that I'm noticing, and you got to tell me if you're finding the same thing with you, is you've got two schools of people. You've got the one school of people who everything is normal and life is carrying on, and we're just going to keep doing things the way we've always done it. And you've got the other group of people so there's three groups. You've got the ultimate extreme where they've just shut down because this is a doom situation. And then you've got a group of people who are saying, okay, it's not the way it was. It's not doom, but we've got to rethink a little bit about how we do stuff. And I'll use the example of some teachers, because now we know that our schools are not going back this semester. So teachers that I know, especially at the elementary school level, were really just delivering a lot of them were delivering exactly the same content that they would do in class. And now they've come to realize, with the reality that they're not going back, is that parents can't sustain this level of workload. And they've got to start thinking not in terms of what we do in an entire day in a classroom, but okay, what's the core material that we need to do at home, and how can we effectively deliver that? And I thought that's that new world we're in. As opposed to everything's the same or it's doom, finding that sweet spot.
Well, my first comment, James, is that you have indirectly started to talk about it.
I know, but we're going to exit that quick.
We've done it, James. And number two is that, I do agree. I think there's two, to answer your question. I think that the people that are starting to think, okay, this is the world that we live in, let's adapt. So as you say, the teachers that are adapting their lesson plans to an online platform, to something that is digestible for parents and children remotely, is definitely going to be the better approach. I mean, we get a nursery plan every week for my boy. And
what does that entail? What's in the nursery plan?
So normally it just tells us what they're doing, and it's like we're going to be learning shapes, the shape of the week, the colour of the week, the stories that they're going to be reading, and it's really good. And I noticed in the last 2 weeks, and I don't know whether this is just that I'm lucky with the nursery we go to, they've totally adapted it, and it's like, here's a link for this story if you want to learn about it online. This is our shape of the week, and so then we can try and institute that at home, and it's all totally manageable within the day, and it just makes it a bit more realistic. Life's a bit more realistic. And number two, from a health perspective, I know we were chatting yesterday, and I mentioned to you that people have got so caught up with what's going on as they've forgotten that life is still the same. So we still have lots of other diseases and health problems that are going on in the world. But people have become so fixated on either not wanting to go to the hospital for fear of catching the coronavirus, or that they're obsessed as to whether they've got the coronavirus and they're missing out on other methods of getting better. So whether it's antibiotics that they might need, or whether they need to go and see a physician for something else. And they're so frightened and paralyzed by the coronavirus that they've forgotten that actually your diabetes still needs to be treated. You still need to check if there's a lump or a bump that is new. You still need to go to the doctor to have that checked out. And especially in pediatrics, there's a lot of children getting quite sick at the moment, and parents are reluctant to take their children to healthcare facilities for fear of the coronavirus, and then they're becoming ill at home. So that's my fear, which isn't really what you asked me, but I've decided to tell you anyway.
So you know what I wondered with self-isolation, if we're going to see some of the things that our kids, find themselves getting, colds and other things, I wonder if we're going to see less of that because they're not around so many other kids, which is a good thing, but it also speaks to building an immunity to things as well. So I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, it'll happen when they go back to school anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll just press pause for a while. And it is important to build up an immune system. And I don't believe in keeping children away with just, very minor coughs and colds. It's good for them to be exposed and to build up that immunity. But I also don't feel like there's any harm in pressing pause on that for a while. And it'll just be in September that they do go back, all being well, that you might find that children become quite sick and the household becomes quite sick. And it's just because they're suddenly re-exposed to loads of bugs and viruses and bacterium that they've not had for quite a number of months. So that would be totally expected and normal.
Let's leave this topic for now, and I'm sure it'll come back. It's inevitable, isn't it? But I do notice, and for those who are listening in, by the way, this is DocTalk. You know that Dr. Jenna Burton joins us every week or so about this time. We've been doing this for a long time now. We're wearing the same colors today. We're both wearing beiges.
Oh, well, this is actually my husband's top because he's been working till the early hours. So I didn't want to go back in our room. So I found some of his clean clothes. I've just shoved on his clothes. But I quite like this because it's actually, I bought it for him. So
there you go. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Thanks, James.
And the fact that we do these now from home, I gotta say, you get out of bed. I've just had a nice brioche piece of toast and a cup of espresso, and I got my juice for the day going. I kind of like this new format.
Well, I bet you do. Yeah, it's especially you because you do podcast after podcast, so it's a full-on day. It's nice to do it from the comfort of your own home.
And we've sort of shortened them a little bit just to work with technology and work for the ear because so many people have got things to do and away we go. But hey, you threw an idea out that we should really start having another conversation about when it comes to health, and that's smoking and all the variants of smoking now that have come about. And I find it just incredible that a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, when we were talking smoking, we were almost exclusively talking cigarettes. Here in the Middle East, maybe a bit of shisha. We don't really talk about cigars, but they're there. We don't talk too much about pipes. There's all sorts of those variants. But the vaping has also taken off. And so suddenly we've got two layers of things that, let's call them inhalants, that for the life of me, Jenna, I can't figure out why anyone would do either. I just don't get it.
Because I've never smoked either because you've never smoked. We can't appreciate the addictive properties of smoking. And it is it's supposed to be one of the most difficult things to give up. But having seen what I've seen, I agree with you. I don't know why in this day and age anyone would start smoking, but they do. Yeah. And I think the reason I suggested it to you is smoking was huge, and even advertising campaigns years and years ago used to be directed at lose weight, start smoking.
Yeah. Well, think of all the sporting events that were sponsored by, I can think of the DeMaurier Light, the Export A Light, the automotive stuff. They funded cultural events. Smoking was glamorous, helped you lose weight, made you look cool. It was interesting in that it was really prevalent in movies, TV. I was watching some old newscasts where the news guys and gals, mostly guys, have a cigarette on the set. They're like smoking a cigarette while they're doing the news. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But this is the thing, is that it was so prevalent, and then there's been so much money fueled into health campaigns to quit smoking because of the dramatic impact it has on not just your lungs, on every single aspect of your body and every single organ system. If you were in a road traffic accident, your chance of recovery are lower. If you needed to go on a ventilator, the chances of you being given that ventilator are lower because there's a low chance you would get off the ventilator. It affects aging. It affects absolutely everything. So there's been so many public health campaigns, and the rates have definitely reduced. But what is scary is that there's this new era that is growing of vaping. And the idea initially was, rather than smoke a cigarette, to try and wean you off smoking a cigarette, we could try vaping. It lacks an awful lot of, thousands of chemicals that are in cigarettes. It only has a handful of chemicals, but it still has nicotine, which is the addictive property of cigarettes. And you can also get turbo-loaded nicotine vapes.
Turbo-loaded. I've never heard that word before.
Maybe that's not what it's called, but you can, whereas with a cigarette, it's a cigarette.
Yeah.
And there will only be a finite number of different types with different levels of nicotine. With vaping, there's a huge number that you can get with extra nicotine, which means it's more addictive. Plus they come with flavors. So they're quite appealing for a younger market of smoker. And what they found is rather than the vaping being used to try and drive people off cigarettes, people are either having dual use, so they're either using the cigarettes and the vaping, or there's people, especially young children, that are starting to smoke vaping or starting to vape instead of smoke cigarettes.
Well, I think the whole vaping tools, some of them look really sexy. They're really nice. They're sleek. You don't stink of cigarette smoke. So suddenly if I've bought my vaping device, they're small, I can fit it in my pocket, I can hide it somewhere, and I can, it can let out this big plume of steam when you exhale. It looks kind of cool. And like you said, all these different flavors, it's pretty incredible. I think one of the scary things that I've been reading about when we start talking about vaping is exactly what you're saying, the number of youth who are buying into vaping, but also it's kind of like a backhander in that a lot of the cigarette manufacturing companies, or at least several of them, are behind vaping as well. They realize, hey, you know what? This is a market we know something about, and we need to get in on this because our tobacco revenue is going down, and this is a new way to get revenue in for personal inhalation devices.
Yeah, and as you say, the marketing for them is huge and most commonly directed towards women smokers or vapors.
You think it's aimed at women?
Some of them are like the techno drive,
right? Okay.
Towards men, but generally smoking and vaping the marketing always tends to be geared largely to women, and the reason being is that more men smoke, significantly more men smoke than women. More men die of smoking related disease than women. However, today women can afford smoking more than they used to be able to in the past. And you find that there's now a 50-50 split between girls and boys that are vaping or smoking. And it's this drive to try and get women smoking. And it's almost like it's the good versus the evil, isn't it? It's the tobacco companies, the nicotine companies trying to drive people into smoking. And then you've got the government that kind of wants to stop it, but also there's quite a lot of tax involved on cigarette smoking. And then you've got the public health campaigners that are desperately trying to get people off these, lethal cigarettes or vapors.
And I was just looking at some of the numbers just for tobacco, and I'm looking at the UAE for 2016, and they're saying the cost of just tobacco-related illnesses in 2016 cost the United Arab Emirates $569 million. And they were saying in that year, the vast majority of victims, 2,718 people died from smoking-related illnesses in the UAE in 2016. These are UAE government stats. 2,718 men died in the UAE from smoking-related illnesses. And this isn't a large country. 265 women. So in smoking-wise, as you said, it's really tends to be a lot more men than women, but there's a lot more women. I always find when I've seen women smoking, men are pretty much outright. They'll just, they're there, they want to do it. Women seem to be a little bit more stealthy. They don't necessarily
go around the corner.
Yeah, they don't. It's almost like in some cases they don't want people to see that they're smoking. I don't know if it's an image thing, and I'm generalizing, because if you go sit outside the mall, when we could sit outside the malls, there were a lot of women there, but there were people who I knew were smokers and who were women who I didn't realize they were smokers. I found out they were smokers along the way, but I never would have realized they were a smoker, whereas the guys who were smokers kind of flaunt it.
Well, what has been so successful about reducing cigarette smoking is the fact that internationally, they have managed to associate a stigma with cigarette smoking, and that has taken many years, a lot of money, and many, many, many health campaigns. However, this is the problem again, as you mentioned with the vaping, is the stigma doesn't apply. They don't smell. They can be kind of snazzy. You can even wear them around your neck, which is even makes them more accessible.
They look like
you
pendants.
can smoke them indoors.
Yes. They look like jewelry. Yes.
Yeah, and this is the huge problem, is that what has been the most successful health campaign ever to have been produced. And even now in the UK, you can't buy branded packets of cigarettes. You can only buy like this really dark green, purposely ugly looking packet of cigarettes, with huge labels on them saying smoking will affect your lungs, smoking causes cancer, smoking affects your unborn child. Whereas with vaping, it's a whole different story. And as you say, they can look like jewelry.
Yeah.
You can buy them so easily on the internet, into whatever color, design that you want. And so therefore, all that really great work at trying to reduce the stigma has been outdone by vaping, which, okay, it's not as bad, but there are still new diseases that are being associated with vaping.
I find with vaping, the thing, much like smoking, the thing that I can't understand is how smart people, and I want to say that, that we're looking at pretty much everyone is a smart person when it comes to making judgment choices and just looking at the cold, hard facts. When you look at vaping and you look at what's in that vial and you look at you start saying the names of the ingredients, and much like smoking, you can't pronounce them. You don't know what they are. Why would you start thinking, hey, hold on a second, I'm just going to take a big breath of this product into my lungs? And I often say to people, I say, we have sewage vents in our homes. In every home, anywhere around the world, if you've got a sewage system in your house, so you've got a closed sanitary system, there's going to be a vent somewhere on the roof. In the UAE, it might be on your fence wall, but you're going to see a tube coming up, a little stack to let air go out. I don't know anyone who's willing to go and put their mouth over that tube and take a breath. And pretty much you're looking at methane. You're looking at methane gas. No one's going to do that. But you start reading some of the ingredients in these vaping vials, you can't pronounce them. As soon as you mention the word silicon in some of these things, I'm going, silicon, like the same kind of silicon that you use to build stuff, to build stuff, to put around a tub, that stuff that gets on your fingers you can't get off. That is not good if you get it into your bloodstream. Why would you breathe any of that in? I find it very odd.
The problem is that it goes back to what we always talk about, James, but we've got a whole population of really stressed people. And what cigarette or vaping smoking does is it just depresses your system for just momentarily, and it's like a little release. Some say it's less like a high and it's more just like a calming feeling.
Okay.
And that's an addictive feeling. And people that do tend to be addictive value the now more than the future. So, and especially after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's when you're more susceptible to your addictive drives. So, if I smoke now, I could get lung disease in the future, or it could give me a heart attack in the future or a stroke. The problem is right now I want to have that, relaxation feeling, and it's easier to value what I want right now than what I want to achieve in the future. And it's easy to defer it and think, right, well, tomorrow I'll quit, tomorrow I'll give up. And they say that 7 out of 10 smokers want to give up cigarette smoking. However, the same can't be said for vaping. I don't know the statistics, but the general ethos is that less people are worried about their vaping than they are cigarette smoking.
Do you think there's also a little bit of, it won't happen to me? Not me. It's going to happen to the next guy, but not me.
I think that's everything with health, isn't it? And I think if you were to go and spend a day in a respiratory ward, or you spent a day in an ICU and you saw how smoking really does affect you, and how normal people, everyday people, basically almost drown. It's one of the worst ways to die is through long-term chronic smoking-related disease.
So explain that to us, because I think there's a lot of folks who, when we talk about smoking-related illnesses and smoking-related diseases and what happens, this idea of drowning, walk through that process the best you can to let both those kids, because I'm really thinking we've got families listening to us, we've got kids listening to us, we've got adults listening to us, and we hear that term all the time, exactly what you're describing, but we don't have a clue what it means.
Okay, so there's a whole series of things that occurs with smoking. So first of all, I'm going to talk through the respiratory side. So that's your lungs. and your breathing. But don't forget that smoking also is one of the main risk factors for heart disease, high blood pressure, and stroke. So
and that's the big three. That's the big three.
Yeah, but that's even just skimming the surface as well. Okay, so just don't forget that. Keep that in the back of your mind. So one of the first things and most noticeable things that smoking does is it slows down the hairs in your in your lungs that help move mucus. So all the mucus that you know when you blow your nose or when you've got a chest infection, you're coughing up mucus. Basically, I never like saying this word, but snot. Basically, that is all in all your airways, and you have hairs that line your airways that bring it up, and without even realizing it goes into your stomach. So those hairs stop moving when you start smoking. And so of a morning, you'll find people have got the smoker's cough. So you'll see them in the corner and they're coughing up and they're
that one.
Yeah. That's like the classic smoker's cough. And that's because you have to use coughing to get rid of all that mucus. So you tend to cough it up. The problem with doing that is it attracts what you have the mucus there for is it attracts loads of bugs and gunk, etc. And it stops you getting a chest infection. But you'll have a lot more of that sitting in your lower airways. So when you've got that sitting in your lower airways, you're more at risk of chest infection. And you're also more at risk of not being able to get enough oxygen in because the mucus is taking up all the space. The other thing is that your alveoli, so at the bottom of your lungs, where you exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide, so basically where you get all your oxygen in through your lungs, that's got lovely folds in it to try and increase the surface area so you can maximize how much oxygen you can get in from your blood, from the air into your blood. When you smoke, they become very, very thin and they start to lose their folds. They become saggy. So what happens is you have a smaller surface area to be able to get oxygen from the air into your bloodstream so that all your cells can respire and basically for you to carry on living. So you have different compensation mechanisms because you've got all this gunk in your lungs and you've got airways that can't actually take in oxygen, which is what the sole function is, to take in oxygen and to get rid of carbon dioxide. So you're running on a lower oxygen reserve, so you're called hypoxic. So it means you literally are running on lower oxygen levels than you should ever be. So your diaphragm flattens and your chest quite literally expands. If you see an X-ray of someone that has chronic, it's called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and that is usually 9 times out of 10 a smoking-related disease. They're referred to as having a barrel chest, and it's because their airways have expanded so much to try and get just as much oxygen as it can from the air into the bloodstream to compensate for all the other processes that are happening and all the degeneration of the alveoli, all this extra mucus. But the problem with that is it's compensated so much is that when you ask them to walk from A to B, whereas you and I can start to take bigger, deep breaths so that we can exercise or we can run or we can walk further, they can't do that because they're already maximized out. So there's a few things that can happen, like most notably their oxygen levels just keep falling to a point that is unsustainable for life. Most commonly they get a chest infection, which they tend to get every year, and they can't get over that chest infection again because they haven't got the reserve to fight the disease because their oxygen levels are already so low. There's just no reserve to cope with them going any lower. They often end up with oxygen tanks at home. There's another problem, which is that their heart starts to struggle to pump blood from their heart into their lungs because of all the resistance, because of the unhealthy lungs. And then they go into something called cor pulmonale, which is a right-sided heart failure. And when you get heart failure, eventually when all your heart is in heart failure, you can't move fluid around your body properly, it pools, and then all that fluid ends up on your lungs. And that's when I say that you're drowning, because literally your lungs actually become full of fluid.
Oh, man. This is interesting because as you were talking, all I kept thinking about, and as you're talking about all the compensation methods that our body puts in place, because we start doing this damage very quickly, and you always get people, so I'm going to jump to the side and I'm going to come back, but you always get people who say, oh, look, my aunt, she smoked all her life, and look at her, she's still fit as a fiddle. Is that, I wonder if that's not because of these compensation mechanisms that our body puts in place. And often, unless you go looking, you don't realize that, hey, my body is working at 100% to compensate for my smoking related damage to it. And eventually you get that point where your body can't compensate anymore. And that's where the person drastically dies down.
I mean, everyone's got an auntie or an uncle or a relative that has smoked all their life and that they die at the age of 85, 86. And, it's really easy to use that person as the benchmark of, it's okay, I can keep smoking because look at Auntie Ida. But all I can say is in medicine, we say common things are common. And I would never dream of doing a shift in A&E back in the UK and not seeing at least 50% of my patients at least being acute exacerbation of COPD. And don't forget, COPD is a smoking-related disease because they are so frequently in hospital. And you have to look at the statistics. Just like it's more common for people over the age of 50 to get endometrial cancer doesn't mean that somebody at the age of 20 doesn't get endometrial cancer. There's always going to be anomalies. And it's up to you whether you want to jump into the statistical pool to see whether you're the one that comes out at 80 or not. But I always say, like, my line to patients would always be, it is the surefire way of trying to kill yourself. And you are, it's almost like an abuse to yourself, but it's just a slower one. And it's kind of up to you whether you want to take the risk.
So how do we get this message? I mean, you work on the front line of medicine. You've got 2 young boys now. You've got family who, back in the UK, you've got friends here in the UAE. You obviously know some people who smoke. How do we get this message, do you think, into the heads of our youth who are watching their friends, family, relatives, and parents smoking and vaping now? How do we get it into their head to say, you know what, I'm not going to start doing that?
I think you should look really at nudge theory. I don't know whether you...
I love nudge theory. Richard Thaler, who is a behavioral psychologist / economist, and he won the Nobel Prize. I love nudge. Richard Thaler, and Sunstein, give that book a read.
I only found out about behavior economics not that long ago, and it's absolutely fascinating. But I do think that we can obviously educate people, which I think is the ongoing drive. But there needs to be more education about vaping, because there's so much about cigarette smoking and less so about vaping. And I think that needs to kind of be our priority going forward. But also it's about, as you said, changing the environment that we're in. So at the moment, they are so accessible. And what's scarier is that vaping is accessible with vitamin E acetate and also with THC, which are the 2 big chemicals that can cause something called Ebola, which is the e-vaping lung disease. It's slightly different than the COPD that I mentioned earlier. So they should be banned. And the difficulty is how do you ban them internationally? But also one of the most successful things with reducing the numbers for cigarette smoke was to ban smoking indoors.
Right.
So people had to go outside. And at the moment, in many countries, that doesn't apply to vaping. So we can try and ban it for vaping as well. And we can start to push for that. Then we might see that the numbers, people aren't bothered. Less so in the UAE, the weather's quite good here. But in the UK, that works really well because nobody wants to go outside and stand in the rain, especially when you're nice and warm and cozy inside a restaurant or inside somebody's house. So it would be great if we could try and change the environment that we're in to make it more unacceptable to vape as much as it is for smoking.
You know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see schools and maybe governments and other like-minded individuals putting together contest campaigns. And maybe right now we've got so many people under social lockdown that we do a campaign with our youth using whatever tools they've got available to talk to other youth to say, hey, it's not cool to vape. Hey, it's not cool to smoke. Don't start. This, and you got a great opportunity right now. Don't start. Just let it go. And
I mean, sorry, go on, James.
No, keep going. Sorry, that's all I wanted to say.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because with public health, there's a finite pot of money available, and it's how do you prioritise? So at the moment, we don't stand a chance of anything being promoted or talked about because everyone is corona crazy, and rightly so at this particular moment in time. But it'd be lovely to have the add-on messages that, if you continue to smoke or if you continue to vape, the coronavirus is more likely to affect you and your lungs. And yeah, like you say, to try and get influencers and celebrities to try and get that message out, because they are the cool people and everyone wants to be the cool kid. I mean, I gave up on being the cool kid quite a long time ago.
Oh, you're cool. You're very cool.
I'm anything. If you ask any of my friends, James, that is the opposite to what they would say. But it doesn't mean as a teenager, as a child, you don't want to be the cool kid. Yeah. And I think
that's the big one, isn't it? All of the peer pressure that our youth are under, and we kind of forget that bodies are changing, looks are changing, hormones, men and women. Everyone is kind of trying to find their place in the world, and everyone's looking for that little bit of an edge to distinguish themselves from someone else in social circles, and smoking and vaping unfortunately kind of fits into that area of differentiation and coolness. And I don't know if kids still try to, and I don't think they do, but I always remember the good old James Dean, and Rebel Without a Cause, and that's the look people wanted, the hair slicked back. Maybe it's more like the Justin Bieber now and stuff like that, but hair slicked back and cool, and you got a cigarette.
Well, just look at Grease Lightning. Oh my goodness. Watching that as a child, I managed to persuade all my school class to buy. There used to be these little like candy sticks. They were white candy. Yeah. They look like cigarettes.
They still sell those now. You can buy those now. Yes, they call them something else. They don't call them cigarettes. They call them. They're still look the same, but they have a different name. But they are exactly the same thing.
Well, honestly, we used to all have them in our pencil cases, and I would stand. We'd all pretend to be holding them, and it was like, I can't wait till I'm 12.
Which character were you?
Smoke.
And which character did you?
Obviously, I was Sandy. Obviously. The goody two shoes. But the point is, I was so lucky, because I do have an addictive personality, and I did at the time, it was still considered cool to smoke. I was lucky that I was in with a crowd that just weren't bothered about smoking.
Okay.
And some of them dabbled smoking paper. I mean, I still skip them about that now. Who smokes paper? Yeah, they would stand and smoke, literally roll up pieces of paper and smoke paper.
Okay.
And luckily, I was a bit of a goody two-shoes. My friends weren't interested. It was really talked against in my school. But not everybody has that luxury. And you find most smokers that you talk to, they started smoking when they were 10, 12, and then they're addicted. And then it's so difficult to give up smoking. It's not impossible. You need support, but it isn't easy. So that's why we need to target the people that are young now.
I'm looking forward to the first Dr. Florence episode talking about smoking. We're just general. Whoever Dr. Florence is, we don't know, but something that you're working on at some point.
It is something I'm working on, James. It's to come. It's to come. And yeah, I can't wait. But that's once I've finished my dissertation.
I know you're so close. You're so close to having this MA done, aren't you?
Yeah, if I'd actually started my dissertation, I've done my introduction.
That's good. You know what? I always say to folks, you just need to write for 1 hour a day, and you just say, okay, either you go for a word count in that time, which I usually did. I would put a word count in and say, okay, I'm going to write 1,000 words today, or I'm going to write 500 words today. But you write 500 words, and that's the goal. You don't go to bed till you've got, and I mean, you've got a lot going on, so figure that word count.
It's actually more difficult at the moment because my children aren't in nursery. Right. And so every time I take an hour out, I can hear through the door. And I'm sure this is the same for parents everywhere. Mummy, where are you? And it's actually heartbreaking because you feel so like the guilt consumes you. So when you actually go to work, it's okay. And I do feel for every parent at the moment that is working from home full time and has children. So my work has stepped down. I'm not doing quite as much at the moment, but at least when I do work, I go to work. Whereas for some people, they're working full time at home and they've still got children around the house, and it must just be so hard.
It's all that time management thing, but it is hard, and I can empathize totally. But the worst part is, as you're outlining, is there's no real solution to it. Everyone's got their own way they've got to deal with it, and this goes right back to at the start we were talking about, is there's no set pattern, and it's a new normal. So that the expectations that we have of ourselves based on a finite set of data are totally different now, because the data set's changed. And how are we going to make that work? It's a challenge. But going back to the whole smoking thing, I really think that you've touched on some core things. I really like the picture you painted of what's going on, and it just reinforces, whether it's vaping or whether it's shisha or whether it's tobacco, cigarettes. It really calls for pause to think, hold on, what am I doing? And I always say, even better, just look at the ingredients. Just print out the ingredients of a Juul vaping unit. Print out the ingredients of what is created when tobacco is burned. And read the ingredients. And I mean, tobacco is the scary one, because there's class 4 carcinogens in that smoke. Why would you smoke something that could possibly give you cancer?
I mean, and the other way to look at it as well is to sort of try and tap into people's guilt drive.
I think so.
If you don't exist anymore, if you become really, really sick, it doesn't just affect you, it affects people around you and those that love you. And ultimately, you are asking those around you to become your carers in the future. And that is fine if that happens through a natural process that occurs. People, I'm sure, will want to look after you and help you, but you're asking people to care for you and to give up their lives as well. And you've got to accept that is a byproduct of smoking. And just one other message, James, is also the fact that whenever they take their foot off the pedal with public health campaigns, and I'm using data from the UK here, you find that there is a rise again in smoking. It's like, you've got to stop relying on the governments as well to try and keep your health on track. They try and they help, but ultimately we've got to take our own responsibility, and we have to do it, and try and ignore the marketing and that is around you, and just think about you and your family.
One of the things that just came to mind is the big challenge we face is with youth. Our 15-year-olds, our 16-year-olds, our 18-year-olds, they're invincible. Nothing's going to affect me. I'm young. I've got my whole life ahead of me. Yes. And I was one of those youth. Now, I didn't smoke. My parents both were heavy smokers. My brother and I never smoked, because we just saw and smelled that stale cigarette ashtray in the morning, and it made us just feel repulsed. So we never smoked. But I think now that you've got these youth who are smoking, who are vaping and thinking, this will never affect me, or by the time it does, I'll be old. Old might be 60 years old. I'm in my mid-50s right now, and little things, joints are starting to get a little tighter. I'm doing more yoga because of that. And I'm going, you know what? When I was 18 and I looked at my parents when they hit their 50s, or I looked at people who were in their 60s, I used to think that was so old, and, their life is near the end. Now I'm there and I'm going, actually, lots of things are changing, but you're still really active, and you've still got so much going on, and your mind is still active, and your body is starting to slow down a bit, but you've still, it's like a total new appreciation for what my parents were going through when they were my age now. And I wonder if youth could only transport themselves ahead to 55 and live that for a day, just to go, man, if only I had, like for me, I always say, if only I'd started doing yoga 20 years ago, if only I had thought about, starting to work out in different ways for muscle mass 30 years ago. If only I'd started doing that then to get the routines going for now, I'd be such a different person. And I'm not in a bad shape, but I can see how I could be much better.
But even my granddad was 82 when he died, one of my granddads, and he said to me, you always think you won't mind when you get older, when it's your time to go. He knew he had chronic lung disease, chronic smoker as a younger guy. And he said, and it's funny, when you get there, you don't want to go at all.
Yeah.
And even my grandma, 93, she always says how lucky she is, and she has nights that she feels uneasy because she knows she's going to die soon, and she doesn't really want to go. So it's true, like, you don't feel any different at any age. No. you've got to invest now for the future.
Yeah. I always laugh. My mother-in-law, she's in her 80s right now. A wonderful lady. But she's in her 80s, but her mind is in her 50s. You know, like she really, you know, when you're talking to her, she says, oh, you know, those old people. I go, how old are those old people? Oh, in their 80s. I go, you're in your 80s. Yeah, but you know what I mean. I don't feel like I'm in my 80s. And I said, well, how old do you feel? I said, I feel like I'm in my 50s, even though she doesn't have the same mobility as she did when she was 50 and all that. But her mind is still at 50. Like that's where she lives and her body is just aged. And I just thought, man, thinking of this whole smoking and vaping and, you know, different countries have even other things people are smoking now that have been legalized. It's like, wow, we kind of need to go into the looking glass, into the sliding door so that we can come back and sort of look at ourselves when we're young from a perspective of when we're older to realize
and also
that.
Remember, we're not invincible. Like you said earlier, you said people think it's not going to happen to me. It sadly it does. It happens to everybody. Our bodies, they're just machines, and they work as well as we feed them. So if we feed them junk, if we smoke, they're not going to work or live as long as if we look after them. Yeah.
So the message at the end of the day is just don't do it. If someone says, "Hey, why don't you give this a try?" No, I'm not going to do it.
And don't think, "Oh, I'll just try one," because it has such addictive properties. So better to say never. I mean, you and me are good examples, James. We were lucky enough that we never tried smoking, and we could have been in a very different situation if we just said, you know what, I'll just try that one, see what happens, or I'll try one, I won't have one tomorrow. So
I often wonder about all the secondhand smoke too, and fortunately a lot of laws have come into place, especially here in the Emirates. You can't smoke in your car if you've got kids in the cars, but I grew up in the era where, you know, that my mom and dad would crack the window just a little bit in the car in the winter, and they'd have that little slit for smoke to go out, and my brother and I would just be inhaling all of that secondhand smoke. And I just wonder for a lot of folks, you know, what effect that has had on them and how they're living through some of those consequences.
I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. I think it was Roy Young, or his name was Roy something. I think it was Young. And he was a really famous guy in the UK, and he used to run a program called Record Breakers. And he was the first public or guy that was in the public light to develop secondhand smoking and to actually die from it. And even I can tell, objectively looking at someone like my mom, she was like yourself, both parents smoked very, very heavily. I can tell her lungs are definitely not as good as they should be. She's very prone to chest infections, has very, very like low signs of lung damage, and it will be through the secondhand smoking, and it's ultimately always going to be a case. And I remember years and years ago, when I was a child, writing a letter saying if I was Prime Minister, I would ban smoking because it's not fair. You're not just doing it to yourself. Whereas with drugs, you take drugs and it affects your body and only your body, unless you cause grievous bodily harm to someone. What is different with smoking is that you're not just affecting yourself, you're affecting everybody else that is in that environment with you.
And I guess the smoke that comes off of vaping, the steam that comes off of vaping, the vapor that comes off of vaping has potentially the same effects. Who knows? No studies have been done on the secondhand vaping smoke.
Yeah, that's it. Is vaping is so young that they don't know whether it causes COPD yet. It does cause a type of lung disease, but it's different to COPD. But that's just because it's so new. Yeah. They don't know. And two, there's so many different types of vaping, and they have very different ingredients that, again, they don't really know yet the long-term damage or the problems with vaping. They're getting, you know, as each day carries on, they're getting more data and they're finding out more things, more downsides to it. But who knows what the long-term problems are? Can
you think of any upside?
Well, I quite like jewellery, so the thoughts of a nice piece of jewellery we would do, but I'd probably leave smoking it at home.
Yeah. You know what, I'm thinking with the jewellery, because the vape things look so cool, why don't we just do that with USBs? Make them into nice jewelries.
This is why we weren't part of the cool crowd, James.
Jenna, you know what? I think we got to give DocTalk a wrap. What a great show talking about why we just shouldn't pick up that vaping stick or the cigarette. Just say no. Just don't do it. It's as simple as that. What a lot of great information. As always, love getting together and talking about medical stuff. I look forward to our next show because we touch on some great topics.
Yeah, I am as well, James. And also we've got the whole gang of us today as well, haven't we? We've got almost a full house.
Yeah, the gang of 5 is going to be the gang of 4, but yeah, we're going to have the gang of 5, so that's going to be fun. We're going to be talking about, I threw out a topic out there. I think I included everyone in, but it's food. I want to talk food, what we're eating, because I know you're doing some great cooking and stuff and playing around.
Yeah.
And we know Andrew does, and Glenn, well, who knows? So we'll find out what's going on.
I look forward to it, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hold on, don't move yet, because we're going to catch up a little bit more, but I want to let everyone know what we've been listening to, because this has been Doc Talk with Dr. Jenna Burton. You want to find out more about our programs? Very easy. Just look for Potaholics with a K across the socials. You want to get in touch with us, potaholics with a K at gmail.com. And we stream as you're getting it from all sorts of different places. Wherever you're listening to us, by all means, give us a rating, leave a comment, let us know how we're doing. And if you want to find Dr. Jenna is easy to find. Jenna, what is your handle on Instagram?
Oh, Dr. Jenna Burton.
There we go. That's how you find Dr. Jenna Burton across Instagram, Facebook, and more. This has been a Potaholics podcast. You've been listening to Doc Talk.